Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to check back in with Dan Donovan, who is the publisher. Are you the editor as well, I think, of Ottawa Life magazine? He's a long-term political activist, media communications expert, and for the last number of years, he's owned and operated Ottawa Life magazine. And it turns out I'm in Ottawa today, and so I thought it would be completely appropriate with a backdrop of the market behind me to check in with my friend Dan and find out what's going on in Ottawa and Ottawa Life. So you were saying that business is actually good, that you've been busy.
Yes, knock on wood, of course, because as we know, Brian, and first of all, welcome to Ottawa, to the most wonderful city in the country. As you know, it's just beautiful here. It's beautiful here this time of year, even with the scourge of COVID. Ottawa is doing fairly well compared to other parts of the province. It's a very difficult time, but knock on wood for us, we've never been busier with the magazine since fourth year now, but it seems since a year ago, February, really, as this awful pandemic started to weed its way into the world, and people have changed the way they're doing business, and they've changed the way that they're having to run their businesses, and a lot of things, as you know, have gone online, and it's created certain efficiencies. Certainly for us, we have, as you know, both a print magazine and our digital platforms, but our digital platforms have just exploded in the last year, and we've never been busier with posts from really across the country. Because we're the magazine in the capital, we get we have readers right across the country and frankly around the world who read us.
They may not have got your magazine if they had to buy a printed prescription. Is that a subscription? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for companies like us, we've always been independent, and the transition from the print to the digital world that began in earnest, over a decade ago, but has really ramped up in the last couple of years and has really now just crested in terms of, print is really going by the wayside. And I think COVID actually accelerated that. But for us, it's created access to new audiences and allowed us to people come and they want to know about Canada and Ottawa as the capital and what's going on here, and we're one of the stop places for them. And so we try to provide a broad range of content material that I think is conducive to that.
And your advertisers that would have been in the print version are following you to the digital version?
Well, certainly we still have advertisers in our print issues, but the whole ad game has changed so drastically, even in the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the last 5 years, the last 2 years, and the digital game right now for advertising revenue, it's not really about ads so much as it is about links and some sponsored content and some paid content, and a whole lot of backlinks and things that are paid for within articles. So the whole matrix of publishing really has changed, and the way publishing is financed has changed. And I think companies that have figured that out are the ones that are successful. One of the challenges that we've seen in the print issue, in the print business, and especially with newspapers, is really that as people have transitioned away from print, advertisers have transitioned away from print. So as print numbers collapse, and this is what's caused, frankly, the newsrooms in the country, they didn't have the ad revenue anymore to pay the staff. Yeah. So there was a number of converging businesses that got together in the media, and they bought out properties and they sort of coalesced things, and then they laid off a lot of the people that did traditional reporting because they didn't have the revenue anymore to pay those people. And that parallel to that, you have the rise of the social media giants, whether it's Google, Twitter, Facebook. There's so many of them, Instagram. And the problem, of course, with those companies is pan-national companies, transnational companies. They don't believe, like, for example, Facebook seems to think they don't have to follow the rules in Canada in terms of, how they provide news, for example. I mean, it's an entirely different game. So So, and they don't pay taxes. Netflix doesn't pay taxes. So this is the big discussion. This is actually what Bill C-10 is about, the new bill in Parliament that the Liberals have introduced. And many people have said, Michael Geist, who's an expert in this, a lawyer at the University of Ottawa and a technology expert, a former chair of the CRTC, has said the same, that this new bill to try to regulate social media is an attack on free speech. But and frankly, I think it is too. We've written an article about it on our website, ottawalife.com. But the point is,
attack on free speech.
Yeah, because what they're trying to do, the government is saying that what they want to do is regulate what is said on social media. Now, the issue is, should it be regulated? And my own view on it is, yes, of course, there has to be some regulation on social media because of just all of the baseless false claims that are made. But how you do that is very important. And certainly for government to be doing it is very problematic. And the bill that they've put in front of Parliament was just met with complete vitriol by a number of people who are, legal experts and CRTC experts and others. Having said that, to be fair to the government, it is an attempt to try to lasso and wrangle in Facebook.
Big technology giants.
Yeah, and my own view is they should be required to obey some domestic laws here. The Australians are going through the same thing. We need to have some rules regarding what they're doing and how they're reporting. They've just become so big. There's a fellow in Toronto, I'm sure you know him. You may have even had him on your show. He's a pretty bright guy, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who's a Liberal MP from the Beaches area in Toronto. And he's, at one point last year, he had threatened to subpoena Mark Zuckerberg to Ottawa, or because he just wouldn't appear before a parliamentary committee. Now, this parliamentary committee that met wasn't just a Canadian parliamentary committee. There were international parliamentarians that were coming to Ottawa. This is about 4 or 5 months prior to COVID starting. They were coming to Ottawa. There were going to be about 440 of them from around the world to discuss globally in democratic countries, these gargantuan powers that Facebook has now in terms of influencing things, because they're basically, everybody's going to them for their news. And Facebook didn't think that they should attend this. It was very disrespectful, because those parliamentarians, the 440 parliamentarians, I believe that's the number, they represented most of the democratic countries in the Western world, or actually in the world. And so there's a certain arrogance about them. And this is why in Australia they're legislating things. This is why in Canada they've put forward Bill C-10. But I think with Bill C-10, they've just missed on a number of levels. And I think the Minister of Canadian Heritage, who's responsible for this, is just really done a horrible job in terms of trying to articulate what it is he's trying to do. Because there's a very fine line, as you know, between free speech and speech suppression. And I think one of the problems that people are having is the Trudeau government, in introducing this legislation, has veered over into this thing that we're seeing in our universities today, which is very problematic, which is this
cancel culture.
Cancel culture, as I say, if it ain't woke, don't fix it. But but no, it's this idea, Brian, in the universities that we should have not free speech, but and the problem with that, of course, is, well, who the hell is going to decide what the better speech is? That's an ideological thing. So this is really misguided. Wilfrid Laurier.
Well, how do you stop down? How do you restrict, the big lie that we've heard about so much of in the United States, or a president even that says things that are close to conspiracy theories? How do you actually suppress that?
Well, I think first of all, again, it's information. The way you don't stop it is to blunt people out or shut people down from speaking. I think you have to speak truth to power. I think in the United States, Donald Trump was voted out. And then even when he was voted out, he still continued on with the big lie. But we have to fight the idea, this is my own view, we have to fight the idea that a way to stamp things out is to suppress speech. What we have to do is we have to have rules around what is acceptable, and you just shouldn't be able to post conspiracy theories. But in coming up with those rules, because that's the point we're at now, we have to develop a matrix for how you're going to do that and what are the rules around that. You just can't say we're going to put on legislation and then a government committee is going to decide what's acceptable and what isn't, because that's big brotherish and that's not going to work. So I think you have to speak to people in government, people in academia, people in the business sector, people in labor, and you have to sit down and come up with a set of rules. And it's got to be based on certain principles, legal principles, especially, that you just, it's the whole idea of there are rules. You can't go into a theater and yell fire. You know what I mean? There are rules around behavior. So we need behavioral rules for the internet. But I don't think the government has put enough time into having the discussion about how to those rules. They just came out with a bill that basically said, we're going to start regulating what people do on the internet. And that just had everybody running. And it scared a lot of people. And I sort of get that, especially when we have a government that's a very woke government who believes in this idea of better speech and, this idea that their way of thinking is the only way of thinking. It's a very dangerous, very, very dangerous arena to get into.
Fascinating conversation. And I understand that you've done a big series on China. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back. And we're going to ask Dan a little bit about where he thinks Canada is in its relationship with China. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Dan Donovan, who is the publisher, editor, owner, main cheese at Ottawa Life magazine. He's run Ottawa Life for the last couple of years. Before that, he had quite a varied career in media and communications. He worked in politics. And he got his start, if you can believe it, as a stand-up comedian. Isn't that right? You were a stand-up comedian?
You know what? when I used to do Yuck Yucks, before I worked on the Hill, this is back in the 90s. I moonlighted as a stand-up comic, and I used to do a lot of political things back in the day, a lot of political humor, and packed the club here with some of my other buddy comedians, and had a great run at it. But I actually had to leave because I found, and this is like in the mid-90s, I found when I was working on the Hill and I go in and do a briefing, people were waiting for a punchline and there wasn't one. Some of the stuff was pretty serious. So there wasn't a punchline when you're talking about some of these issues. But when you're doing comedy, you just have to watch politics and it writes itself. I mean, it's quite incredible what we get here in this country with our leaders, and sometimes you can't write this stuff. So I'm always I'm still a keen observer of what's going on in politics with our very woke prime minister and our very sort of clumsy. Somebody told me the other day that when it comes to the real theater of comedy, it's the House of Commons question period. But we, of course, haven't seen much of that with COVID. COVID has taken that away and we're into the Zoom question period. But it's, our politicians are as diverse as the people in the country. And you get, as my grandmother said, you get what the voter's always right. So the government we have today is what the people want. And we're going to see if that changes in the coming months. One of the things I was mentioning to you, Brian, is, we've been doing a lot of things on China. Yep. And I'm, like many people, I think, in the country and many observers, very concerned about our approach to China. I think the approach is very misguided. And we seem to have this, it's almost a created negative view of China that's happened December 1st, 2018, when Meng Wanzhou was arrested we had great relations with China. China was, one of the multilateral trading nations of the world. They had done a lot of economic development around the world, a lot of investments in Canada. But after that arrest, things have just gone so far south, and the government has just sort of, in my opinion, sort of doubled down on their really stupid strategy with China, and I really think it's backfiring on them, and I'm quite concerned about it. And I think it's
because of the arrest and jailing of the two Michaels. Do you think?
Absolutely. But we, just stepping back, Meng Wanzhou, when she was arrested, this was the vice president of Huawei Technologies and the daughter of the founder of Huawei,
the chief financial officer.
Yes. And chief financial officer, daughter of the founder of one of the largest companies.
Member of the Communist Party. Very senior in the Communist Party, I understand.
No, it's interesting you say that because, yes, but this is part of the problem with the dialogue and the narrative, because I personally think, China's got a branding problem in that it's the Communist Party of China, but people here perceive the Chinese Communist Party to be like Soviet communism or North Korean communism, or some of the worst types of dictatorships that we've seen. And it's not that at all. It's a very different beast. But the narrative here is to talk about China post 2018 like it's a repressive state, like the people in China are an unhappy people, that they're not happy with their government. And that is not the case. There's 1.4 billion Chinese people. They are the second largest economy in the world, soon to be the first. Post Tiananmen Square, they've had what they call their opening up. They're in multilateral institutions all around the world, and they have issues, and they have a lot of things we don't agree with, for certain. They don't have the same rule of law that we do, but it doesn't mean they don't have their own rule of law. The Chinese have been around; the dynasties have been around for 4,000 years. The Canadian Confederation, what are we, 150, 175? The Americans are at 250. They've been around 4,000 years. So our approach to China, I think, is something that we need to reflect more on. It's a very judgmental approach. It's a very harsh approach. The Chinese feel
very egotistical, sort of superior. Western, democracy is best and the only way forward kind of approach, is it not?
You know what? You basically hit the nail on the head. I think, it's all a couple of years ago, I was speaking with, was having tea, believe it or not, with the former ambassador Liu Xie in Ottawa. And we were talking about China and the Chinese and our relations with Canada. And of course, one of the things we always bring up, which we should, is, or we think we should, is human rights issues, But I was curious because we bring up human rights issues with China, but they never bring up those issues here with us. And they never bring up the issues we have with regards to how we've treated our Indigenous people and the Japanese head tax or the Chinese head tax during the war, or Canadians' attitudes towards the Jews prior to World War II. They don't bring up those things. And Liu Xie said, Ambassador Xie said, well, that's not our way. And he said, China has 1.4 billion people. You have 38 million. We have many problems. He said, we have many problems, and we're working on them, and we've made many mistakes.
Okay. So Dan, people have called what's happened with the Muslim minority in the northwestern portion of China a genocide. Do you think that the way that we've reacted to and motions that have been passed in Parliament have been wrong in that regard?
I think that the way we've approached it has been wrong. And let me preface up by saying, my background academically is I'm a historian. So I believe me when I say I am very well versed in the Holocaust and in some of the awful genocide of the 20th century, whether it's Pol Pot, whether it's Stalin, I'm the Armenian genocide. But I think when it comes to what's happening with the Uyghurs, there are two things. We rush to judgment. That's the first point. The second point is if you look at what's been said about the Uyghurs, the Chinese are vehemently denying it. Vehemently. They're not denying that they don't have prisons. They will tell you they've set up prisons. They call them re-education camps. I recall having lunch with the current ambassador from China a year ago, January, and asking him, you've got these re-education camps. And we find that with anathema here. We would never do that here. But the reason the Chinese are getting so upset about the Uyghur issue is because we're calling it concentration camps. And they get very upset about that because they believe that's a deliberate media misrepresentation. When we say concentration camps, we know what that means. That means horribly killing people and putting them in ovens and doing all of what goes with that. And they say, that's not that they vehemently deny it. Their president has denied it. Their foreign ministers denied it. The ambassadors here have denied it. They don't deny that they have prisons, and they call them re-education camps. We may not agree with that. I don't agree with that, but it's a bit of a stretch to go from that to suggest that they are killing millions of people. They are not killing millions. There's no evidence that they are killing millions of people, that they are torturing millions of people. They have incarcerated people. We don't agree with it. But, we incarcerate people here. We incarcerate.
So they're not trying to stamp out the Muslim minority.
No, they vehemently deny that. And there's evidence to support that. I've looked at the evidence. I've written about this. Others have written about this. And this is this idea that the Han Chinese are trying to stamp out the Uyghur minority. And the facts just don't show that that's happening. The Uyghur minority.
What about Hong Kong? There's been lots of protests in Hong Kong by Hong Kongese about the mainland Chinese controls that go far beyond whatever was agreed between Britain and Hong Kong and China when China took over Hong Kong. It appears that democracy isn't what people thought it would be in Hong Kong, that people are being selected by the Central Chinese Communist Party. Is our opposition to what's happening in Hong Kong appropriate, not enough, or we shouldn't have any opposition at all?
Well, that's a very interesting and loaded question. What I would answer with this, I think that the problem in Hong Kong is that after World War II, the population of Hong Kong was 700,000 people. Today it's 7 million, over 7 million. There are 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is part of China. I mean, we may not like that here, but the fact is that Hong Kong is a part of the country of China. And they had a two-state, the two-system solution after Hong Kong was ceded back from the British in 1999, where for the next 40 years, it was to have these two systems. I hope it haven't happened. But, as many people, so when it comes to Hong Kong, Brian, as you know, Hong Kong was taken by force by the British in the 18th century to support the opioid trade. This is to this day why the Chinese have just a big thing about drugs. They're very much an anti-drug country.
It's really quite ironic and kind of, interesting that we're objecting to what the Chinese are doing in Hong Kong when we, the West, the UK, Britain, forced their way in to Hong Kong because the Chinese weren't allowing us to fairly trade opium. And we wanted
drugs.
them to allow us to come and sell the Chinese opium. And we forced our way in and took over Hong Kong because of that, we being the British.
So in the sort of lexicon of Chinese history, you're absolutely right. And I talked earlier about the 4,000 years of Chinese dynasties, which ended during that period of time. The last Chinese emperor and all of those types of things all happened in that period. And then China went through this revolution in the early 19th century when then you had, Mao Zedong versus, the Chiang Kai-shek and the forces that weren't communist, and Mao Zedong won. But the fact is that, when Hong Kong was run by the British, they didn't have elections to allow the Chinese to decide who was going to run Hong Kong. The British ran it. I mean, the hypocrisy is kind of outrageous. And what's happened, though, is because Hong Kong had become such a commercially successful global city, and there's a lot of, I always say to my kids, what's it always about if there's a problem? The money. It's about the money. So Hong Kong became this epicenter for Southeast Asia, Western business investments, and a lot of money there. And then, of course, the population and the density of the island got so great. What they say is, look, Hong Kong is part of China. So they get upset. And again, it's not what I think or what other people who have similar views to me think. What I'm trying to do as Ottawa Life Magazine is just explain this from the Chinese point of view. Every time I try to explain this, not on your show, but certainly in print and on our website, and I try to just say, well, the Chinese don't see it that way. They see it this way. You're immediately attacked. Oh, you're some kind of Chinese party communist stooge. Oh, they must be paying you. Oh, you're biased. And I just say, no. The point is, we have to look at this from how the Chinese see it. They see it as Hong Kong was taken by force. They got it back. The British ceded it back to them in an agreement. And now we have Western countries who are certainly, they got 1 million people out in the street. There's certainly people in Hong Kong who want the traditional British system or with the democratic system, but there's also another 6 million people in Hong Kong who don't necessarily feel that way. For the Chinese is, though, as the ambassador said to me in a discussion I had with him, he said, look, we would not tell people in Quebec that they should rise up against their government in Canada, because that would be inappropriate, because Quebec is part of Canada, even though you have separatists in Quebec. Quebec is part of Canada. Hong Kong is part of China. Canada should not be encouraging people in China to break the laws of China. So this is the discussion, and it's a hard discussion. But I asked him, well, what would you say to the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong? And he said to me, the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong are welcome in Hong Kong. They should live their lives in Hong Kong, but they should not break the law. They should not be breaking the laws of China if they're going to live in our country. It's the same thing with Meng Wanzhou. Chinese believe that Meng Wanzhou was kidnapped. That's how they see it. We may not agree with that, but they think that she was kidnapped, that we were used as a stooge by Trump. The Trump administration told our officials to detain her using this extradition treaty. The extradition treaty they used, by the way, has never, ever been used before to stop someone in a civil case. As you know, you're from the corporate world. In a civil case that involves a commercial issue, the courts are used for that. But she was detained under this extradition treaty that's been used in the past for drug dealers and murderers, okay? And she was detained. We were in free trade negotiations with the Americans who were threatening us. Brian Mulroney, Jean Chrétien, the late great Prime Minister Paul Martin, have all said, former prime ministers have all said, she shouldn't have been arrested. Over 100 Canadian diplomats have written a letter saying the two Michaels, that's a very serious problem for our country. They should be released. Our government should be doing more to get them released, but they're not. They're actually making things worse by just their actions. They're suggesting the Chinese are a genocidal state, that they don't have the rule of law, that they don't obey international intellectual property rights. They're pulling up a whole bunch of things to continue to make China look bad. And I look at that and I say, how is that helping get the two Michaels out? Let's get the two Michaels out. Even let's go back to what we used to do in the Cold War, which is let's do a deal. Tell them, look, we'll return Meng. You give us the two Michaels back. Get them out of jail. But they won't do that. So our government doesn't have a strategy.
Why has the government been so timid in this? And so, they keep on saying rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. But, it doesn't appear to have been bringing this strategy forward at all.
Well, I'm not saying, I genuinely, when I say this, I'm genuinely honestly, I don't think our prime minister has a clue what the rule of law means. I mean, this is a guy who's been on 3 occasions sanctioned by the ethics commissioner. This is a guy that broke the rule on the SNC matter. This is a guy that turned around on the WE scandal and had his family got paid $600,000 by this charity that somehow made a profit for their own business purposes. And he's talking about the rule of law. As the Chinese said, the ambassador said to me, and he said it to many other people here, you talk about the rule of law, but you used an extradition treaty. The Americans forced you to use that treaty. You were like the meat in the sandwich. You just went along with it. Here's an interesting point. You know, Meng Wanzhou was arrested on December 2nd, I believe, 2018. So you detain someone at an airport, it's because you want to detain her, extradite her because she's committed a crime. It took the Americans 59 days to come up with charges against her. 59 days. So they didn't even have charges when she was detained. 2 days after she was detained, Donald Trump said in a news conference that, you know, they asked him about the arrest, and he said, well, you know, we might use that if it works for us in terms of our trade war. So to your earlier point, China is not the West. As both ambassadors have said to me in previous interviews I've had with them, China doesn't want to be the West. China is China. And we have to start, in my opinion, dealing with China and respecting them from their perspective.
We're going to take a break. We're talking to Dan Donovan, the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life magazine. We're going to ask him a couple more issues about China. We're going to ask him about 5G. We're going to ask him about Taiwan. We're going to ask him about South China Sea. Fascinating to hear his views. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Dan Donovan, who is the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine. He is a fascinating gentleman. We were chatting earlier that he was a stand-up comic. He was a Politico on Parliament Hill. He's been a media and communications expert, and he is now running Ottawa Life magazine, doing a series on numerous different things. We've had him on the show and talked about police issues in Ottawa, and we're now talking about China. Dan, there's this issue about the president of Taiwan and getting a award as a great politician, parliamentarian, etc. Is Taiwan part of China? Should we be providing such a recognition to someone that is leading Taiwan instead of China?
Well, first of all, Taiwan is not part of China. I mean, the Chinese see Taiwan as part of China. We don't. So that's the simple answer to the question. For China, and if you were to talk to people in mainland China, they see China, they believe China is part of it. And you know the history of it when they split after the communists and defeated the Sun Yat-sen people.
So how is Hong Kong part of China and Taiwan not part of China?
Well, first of all, Hong Kong was ceded back and is legally recognized as part of the country of China now by the United Nations and the world body. Taiwan is not recognized by Canada. Taiwan doesn't have a diplomatic mission here. They have a consulate. They don't have an official ambassador here. But Taiwan is a country, and I think in the side of the Chinese, and the Americans use Taiwan because it keeps them in the play over there. But of course, we should, we have to recognize Taiwan, because to do so is just to pretend that something that exists doesn't exist. Taiwan exists. It's a very different place than China. China and Taiwan over the last 20 years have had pretty good relations, but Taiwan has never been ceded back to China, for example, like Hong Kong is. Hong Kong is part of China and is recognized as part of China. So
if China takes military measures to regain Taiwan, what should Canada do?
Well, again, I just think that is, and who knows, one day I may be proven wrong. I just don't see that ever happening. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the history of China, can you tell me what the last time China invaded a country? Operate as as my friend, a very wise man said to me, bit of a mentor to me, a guy named Lou Mackenzie, former Canadian peacekeeping general, brilliant man. And I was out having a beer with Lou one night, and he said, you know, Dan, China, there are 3 million Chinese in Africa, and they haven't fired a shot. And his point was the Chinese do things through economic commerce and trade. With the old Silk Road that joined China to, through Central Asia and over the Urals into Europe. Now they have their Belt and Road Initiative, which is in 130 countries. It's one of the largest infrastructure projects in the world. 130 countries have signed on to it. But the Western narrative is that this somehow China is going in and giving money to these countries so it can bankrupt them and then take control of them. Factually, that's just not true. The numbers don't add up. That's a lie. It's not the case. But the point is, the Chinese have signaled that they're going to have a presence. They have what's called a Blue Sea Navy now, which means they can operate anywhere in the world. It's why the Chinese have an interest in our
Arctic.
That's something I'm concerned about. The Americans have an interest in our Arctic. That's something I'm concerned about. The British are in our. Why the hell are all these other countries in our Arctic? The United States a couple of years ago, for the first time, it was under Trump, said they wouldn't recognize Canada's sovereignty over the Arctic. So my point is this, the Chinese have a Blue Sea Navy. They can operate anywhere now. And they're operating in the South China Sea and in the Pacific because that's where their country is. And they would say to you, well, America's not over here. This is China. So they have to find peaceful coexistence. But I think it's a false narrative to suggest that China would ever invade or do anything militarily against Taiwan. I just think it's a lot of white noise and hot talk. And
one of the big issues that Canada's going to face is 5G and whether Huawei should be the provider of 5G. And there's a lot of people around the world that think we should not allow Huawei to provide 5G, that it'll be a way for the Chinese Communist Party to somehow get access to all of our communications. And in fact, there are voices in Australia and the US and the UK that I think say that it's got to be people other than Huawei. What's your position? Should we, and at the same time, from what I understand, Huawei is like 30% cheaper. So should we be using Huawei or should we prohibit Canadians from using Huawei 5G?
Well, again, I go back to the Western, especially in Canada and some of the American narrative on this, started by Trump as a trade thing. There's currently a case in the United States District Court in New York regarding Huawei. They're suing the American government. Huawei has made all kinds of commitments related to the network around the world. They have come out, they've filed international legal document conferences in Europe saying this is just a lie. This idea that there's a backdoor to the Huawei technology to all of a sudden, if you're using a Huawei phone, they're going to know what you're cooking in your kitchen at night. It's part of this narrative that has not been proven. It's ridiculous. In the United States, the company.
Some people think that Bill Gates is going to know everything about us if we get the vaccine.
Well, I mean, this goes back to sort of circling back to the discussion we had at the beginning about technology and where's the place and what's news and what isn't and who gets to be the arbiter of that. I think that the 5G system is, I've seen it up front firsthand. I've been to China a couple of times. I've been to their research facility in Shenzhen. It blew me away. This technology is going to change the world. It's already been accepted in France. It's been accepted through most countries in Europe. It's been widely accepted in the Middle East. It's been widely accepted in Africa. And I'm concerned that if we don't participate with 5G, we are going to fall behind. It's already exists through Bell and TELUS through dealings, and it's a supplier chain to Huawei, Nokia. So so they say, oh, Huawei's not in Canada, but they're doing stuff with Nokia. Nokia's here with Bell and TELUS, so they're here anyways. So it's this, and then when you hear our parliamentary committee will come out with a report and they'll say, we believe, and you get the former head of CSIS saying, we believe that this is dangerous for our country to have Huawei here, but they don't give you any specifics because it's too secret. Then you hear that Susan Rice, the former Obama, believe the United Nations ambassador, has come out and said, she came out a couple of months ago with Anna Maria Tremonti and said, I believe Huawei is a danger to Canada if they do this. But she didn't disclose when she was doing that interview that she's on the board of directors of Netflix. And of course, that could have a real impact on Netflix business, the Huawei technology. So there's always something going on behind the scenes. Huawei, by the way, the 5G technology, the theory behind it was from this Greek guy who the Chinese, pulled out an old PhD of his, and but he's Greek and he's from Greece, and they used that's the basis of the findings of their technology for 5G, and then they took it from that sort of theoretical stage and put it into something. Guess where? In Canada, in Ottawa, at Huawei Technologies here. Some of the key people working on this technology are here in Canada, in Ottawa. So, we have to have a discussion with the Chinese that's not based on fear and adversarial stuff and a false narrative. And my bigger concern is the Canadian government has no strategy. We have these people at Foreign Affairs. I don't know what the hell they're doing half the time on the China file. They seem to have no strategy. And what's even more worrisome is you have Aaron O'Toole. Talk about a tool. I mean, you got Aaron O'Toole. He is even worse on China. He thinks China's an enemy. He's basically said that. They're an adversary at best or an enemy. We have to watch them. It's because these people are trying to paint China as Soviet-style communism. And China has many things. They have many problems. They have many things I don't agree with. But they are not Soviet communists. They are not North Korean communists. The Chinese people are not unhappy with their government. We may not agree with that. We may not want to hear that. But those are facts. And we need to approach them and get off our superiority complex and try and understand why the Chinese do what they do.
Why would Ottawa Life be running a series on all these issues in regards to China?
Well, we started doing a series. We've been doing series. So that we sort of fell into this because several years ago, we started with a series on the United States because of the bilateral relationship. Then we did one on Ireland, and then we moved and we did one with France, and then we did one with Belgium. And then before you know it, I noticed, I think it was about 2008 or 9, that under the Harper government, they had a very bright minister, a fellow named John Baird. And John Baird was the foreign affairs minister, and he started doing a lot of stuff with Kazakhstan. And everybody thinks Kazakhstan, Borat, the bathing suit, all that, right? So I thought, why are we doing stuff with Kazakhstan? It was kind of funny to me. So I started looking into it. And then I found out that, Kazakhstan I always thought Canada was the biggest uranium producer, but we're not. In fact, we're second. Kazakhstan is the first uranium producer. And then we were doing a lot of business with Kazakhstan, which has a lot of similarities to Canada in terms of its population, its natural resources, probably the most influential country in Central Europe, a very wealthy country. And the Harper government had identified that as a country, as a middle power, a democratic group. So we started doing a Canada-Kazakhstan series. And then through Canada-Kazakhstan, they have a lot strong connections to China. The Chinese diaspora in Canada, there's a 250,000 Chinese foreign students here. The Chinese diaspora in Canada is bigger than the Francophone population here. So
hold it. The Chinese diaspora in Canada is larger than the Francophone. The Francophone population is what, 22% of Canadian population?
It's 8. There's 8 million in French people in Quebec, and then you've got the Anglophone population. But there's more Mandarin speaking people in Canada than Francophones, and really? This is So hey, Brian. I mean, you're in Mississauga. Go up to Newmarket, and I mean it's so.
No, I accept that, but I never realized that it was bigger than French speaking. That's astounding.
So, well, this is the point. So it's there. We have a lot of Chinese Canadians here, the Chinese diaspora, and wonderful people, the community.
Now, a lot of them would have left in opposition to communist China. A lot of them are from Hong Kong. A lot of them speak Cantonese. A lot of them come from Shanghai, speak Shanghaise. Are they supportive of what you're saying in regards to China, or are they actually in opposition because they?
Well, they're not. They're certainly not monolithic. I'm sure you can find a lot of them that are not supportive, but you'll also find a lot of them that are. they have if the Chinese people aren't like just monolithic, all think the same. And this is why I would say even, people think here, and the media here contribute to this, I think, as does our government, that the Chinese are a repressed people. They are not a repressed people. They have a different system. But even in Canada, they're different. There are certainly people in Canada that think that the Hong Kong should stay under the democratic sort of British traditional rule. But there's a lot of Chinese, just as many people, more people, I would say here, that think the reverse. But there's also a lot of people, that Chinese people that came to Canada for sure, that were against the communists. But we have to also remember the communists of 1970 in China, the Mao Zedong, and then after he passed away, and the Gang of Four, and they got rid of the Gang of Four because they didn't want to continue on with the Mao Zedong thing. After Tiananmen Square, which coincidentally, we've really 31, 32 years ago, but all of a sudden now it's the front news because of the whole Meng Tu Michael thing. This becomes a big thing that our media are focused on and our government's focused on. In China, they're not. It happened 32 years ago. Tiananmen Square, as tragic as it was, led to the opening of China. Deng Xiaoping, after that, realized we have to open up China. We have to become part of the world. We can't have this happen again. You'll recall when the protests were happening pre-COVID in Hong Kong and the umbrella protests and these types of things, the narrative here for many, many weeks in the news is the Chinese army are going to go in and there's going to be another Tiananmen Square. This was a common thing in the media. And, and if I say that, I'm being an apologist again. But I said at the time, the Chinese are not going to go into Hong Kong with the army and do that. They won't do that. They're not going to do that. But what they have said is, you can't be going around and destroying buildings and property. You can't, they went into the legislature. You can't do that. And they were concerned that Western countries, this is from their point of view, they will say to you, if Western countries are encouraging that behavior, they wouldn't encourage people to go into our parliament and tear it apart. They wouldn't encourage people to go into one of our provincial legislatures and do that.
I think former President Trump encouraged people to tear apart his House of Representatives and House of Congress.
And how did that turn out? That's my point. This is what the Chinese say. So so why is Ottawa Life doing this? Well, frankly, in the last 2 years, the reason we've been writing a lot about it is because I've been just appalled personally at the mundane, frankly, sometimes stupid coverage or analysis coming from a lot of our other mainstream media here, who just refuse to say, okay, well, what's the Chinese point of view in this? I'll give you one little tidbit, a very interesting thing that happened. In 2019, in January 2019, Brian, Ambassador Liu Xie published a piece in the Globe and Mail, an op-ed. And in that op-ed, he said that he thought that Canada was exhibiting racist tendencies towards China in how it handled the Meng affair. And oh my God, the media in this country went nuts. How dare he say that? How dare he accuse us of being racist? How dare he accuse us of having a superior attitude? Who does this guy think he is? So then 3 days later, here in Ottawa, he holds a press conference. He opens up the Chinese embassy. I swear to God, I've never seen anything like it. The entire parliamentary press gallery showed up at the Chinese embassy. They're sitting in this big boardroom at the embassy. There must have been 60 reporters sitting around this massive table. And Liu Xie sat there for 2 hours. And he, part of it was him telling you like it is, like how he sees it, which is fine. But then anyone who wanted to ask a question, he answered the question. And some of the media just seemed incensed. How dare you would say that we're racist or superior? So he made the point, and the point was this. You say we don't have a rule of law system. That implies that your system is superior. De facto, we're inferior. That's what you're saying. We're inferior because we do have a rule. Yeah, but your rule of law system isn't like our system. Well, we don't want to be you. We don't want to, and this is the problem with the narrative. It's inherently, at a fundamental level, in my opinion, a superiority narrative. And that's a fine line from that to being racist, right? We're superior. Our system is better. We have the rule of law. We would only want to live in this system. The Chinese are repressed. Their people are repressed. They're killing all of these Uyghurs. They're taking over Hong Kong. They're going to invade Taiwan. Oh my God. It sounds like, who are these? That's the narrative. The other side of the narrative is they have pulled 500 million people, 500 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years into the middle income. They've grown from one of the smaller economies in the world to now, within the next couple of years, they'll be the largest economy in the world. They have the biggest infrastructure project. Now, if I start talking like this, yeah, I can see it now. I can hear, oh, here's Mr. Like, I was called, somebody called me Chairman Mao Dan, you know? Like,
Chairman Mao Dan, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on China. We're out of time. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments with Chairman Mao Dan in just a minute. Stay with us. What a fascinating discussion with Dan Donovan of Ottawa Life magazine. Chairman Dan, really appreciate you chatting to us about China and your perspective, which is an important perspective for us all to hear, if not agree with, at least to hear. And I think you're right that it's a perspective that's not publicized by the balance of the Canadian media. So I congratulate you for doing that. You were kind enough to invite me to a party at the Chinese embassy about a year and a half ago. I've been to China a couple of times. I've spent time as a student in Shanghai at Fudan University. I wrote a paper. You might want to publish it at some point in time in Ottawa Life magazine on the Beijing consensus versus the Washington consensus. And I compared the two different economic strategies. It was quite fascinating. So I think there's a lot of truth in your arguments, and thank you for making them. But I got to ask you just before we finish, you made this comment about halfway through that you said our prime minister was Mr. Woke. What do you mean by that? Well,
I just think that you know, and I say part of that tongue in cheek. Look, the prime minister has a tough job. I think any prime minister has a tough job, but I think that Mr. Trudeau is very much concerned about perceptual things rather than doing things or achieving things. You know, he's concerned about, you know, he wants to be the friend to the Indigenous people, and he's going to clean up all of their all of the problems with the, you know, no drinking water available in 90 communities, but he doesn't do it. He says he does, but now he's gone from we're going to repair it to we have a website so we can follow the progress. You know, this is a guy. He's, you know, even on our vaccine rollout, he says he keeps saying we have these vaccines, but we don't. They're not here yet. We're waiting, but he announces them like they're here. So he's a prime minister who's very obsessed with how he's perceived, how things are perceived, and he'll say things that aren't necessarily true. I find it a very frustrating thing. I've never seen a prime minister who just makes stuff up and people go along with it. At the same time, you know, the Conservatives and Aaron O'Toole, they got their own problems. They just seem to have this sort of nastiness about them, and I think that actually helps the prime minister. So I'm not, you know,
what do you think is going to happen?
I think that first of all, I think the person that's in the biggest trouble is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, because he's tied himself so close to Trudeau. The NDP right now have a serious financial problem. They don't have any money to run an election. They've been a disaster at fundraising. They went from like 39 seats in the last election to 23, and Singh goes around like he's got it going. He doesn't. The only reason he's anywhere is because he keeps voting for Trudeau to keep them in power. I think it's possible for the Liberals to win again if there's not enough people who dislike Justin Trudeau, because there's not enough people. It's got to be more about people disliking Trudeau and voting him out, because I don't get a sense that a lot of people have really warmed to Aaron O'Toole or really like him. So it's unfortunate, you know, it's not like we're going to be voting for someone. We're going to be voting against someone. And depending on how that goes, Trudeau may get in again. It's very possible.
Dan Donovan, publisher of Ottawa Life magazine, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your perspectives on Canadian politics and on China. And we're going to have to do this again real time soon.
Have fun in the greatest city, Brian.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Okay.